I'll now pass it over to Lisa Bellata and Eric Lasky from the Ridgewood High School.
Okay. Thank you. Eric Lasky, Lisa Bellata. We have been at Competency Work now, working on competencies within Ridgewood High School for going on our 4th year. I can go ahead and go on to that next slide. I want to tell a little story about the very first year we started competency within the school and our students' reaction. And we started in our math classes, and because our math realized, hey, we need to make some changes. And we started with, we're like, let's use a different approach to make sure that we reach all students. And we no longer wanted students to sit in a classroom and move on to the next classroom, maybe not quite ready, maybe passing with a C or D. We want to make sure that they knew all the material they needed to. They learned all the skills before they moved on. And so we started competency education, and a month into it, we kept getting a lot of student complaints, student concerns. So we went and visited all the competency classrooms, and we asked them, go ahead and write down, what are your complaints? What are the problems? You know, what is wrong with what we're doing? And it's amazing that, you know, they all wrote separate things, but there's basically 3 things that every student wrote and what they didn't like. And here's what they told us. They said, we want, and this is what they wanted from their teachers, we want our teachers to tell us what to do, tell us when to do it, and tell us how to do it. And Lisa, what was your reaction to that?
Well, my answer was there's only 2 places for you to go after high school. That would be a factory or the military, because that's the only thing we'd be preparing you for. So obviously we had been doing it wrong for a long time.
To go ahead and go to the next slide. You know, this is, you know, we took a look at the portrait of a graduate, and from our portrait of our graduate, we came up with our graduation competencies. These demonstrate the skills that we want for every one of our students when they graduate. And these skills, actually, there's a rubric for each one of these, and for each of these competencies, there could be multiple skills within them. And there's a rubric, and in that rubric, it shows where the student should be, you know, demonstrating that they are ready to graduate from Ridgewood High School. You know, you'll see we have these, you know, there's different words that people use. Knowledge, skills, dispositions are one of them. We wanted to make sure that it was more in a language that our students and our parents would understand. And you can sort of see, instead of using, so we chose the life and career innovation and our learning skills. And you're not going to see math in there. You're not going to see English. You're not going to see social studies, but you're going to see the skills that these students should be walking away with from these classes. Okay. Go ahead and go to the next slide.
Okay, so what we've done in the next few slides is kind of give you, even though we said that we've only been doing competency ending our 4th year, we actually set a foundation for competency long before. And it started way back in 2011 and 12 when we started training our teachers on project-based learning. We were doing universal by design models, and we went to a formative and summative assessment model. And that one drew the most criticism from teachers because for the first time, homework didn't count. So their answer would be is, why would kids do homework if it doesn't count? And we went through a big learning curve with that. One of the big changes that it helped us in our transition as well is when we went one-to-one. One of the reasons why we had very little trouble transferring over with this COVID pandemic is that we were already one-to-one for so many years from 2013. So our kids were very well versed in blended learning, for example. But one thing I do want to touch on, in the same year, in 2013, our superintendent hosted a World Cafe. And in that World Cafe, there was every stakeholder you could imagine, from a community member all the way down to a student. And they were asked to define a Ridgewood graduate. And nobody ever defined we wanted them to be able to, you know, to do calculus, for example, or read Romeo and Juliet. What they did ask for are the 21st century skills. They wanted them to communicate. They wanted them to collaborate. They wanted them to to be professional, basically. And from that vision process, we took that work, and that vision had never been fulfilled. And that vision is what took us 4 years ago when we joined the competency pilot. It took us to designing those graduation competencies that Eric just went over with you. But the big thing that we wanted to touch on with you today was our why. We were asked to speak to you about at-risk students, and we noticed that one of the questions was about how does this help with equity? And that is what we were looking for. 50% of our students, since I've been in the district since 2002, did not meet college and career readiness standards. It didn't matter if we were doing RTI or UBD or MTSS or ILS. You can use any acronym you want. Those were all the reforms, all the initiatives, and none of them equated to closing the achievement gaps for our subgroups. And our two major subgroups at Ridgewood High School, our growing subgroups, are our free and reduced lunch students and our Hispanic students. And we were failing them. We were failing our students. They were not college and career ready. So when this opportunity came 4 years ago to jump on this pilot, we took it and we ran with it. And that is where we kind of, I'm moving you up the timeline. So if you can go ahead and go to the next slide, we can keep talking here.
Yeah.
Eric,
and if you look at this,
over?
Yeah. If you look at this next slide, you'll see things that we put in and we changed. And really all these things in these next year and a half, we're trying to personalize learning, find out what the students' interests are and relate that, take the curriculum and relate it to them and try to let them choose how they want to learn stuff and how they want to apply stuff. So we started, even before competency, we started on trying to personalize learning for each student and finding out what motivates them and what do they want to do. As you go on to the next slide, you'll then see came the Illinois State Board of Ed Competency Pilot, which Angelique Hamilton is in this conference, and she's part of Illinois State Board of Ed, and a big part of the competency pilot and even continue at that. And our superintendent basically came to us and said, this is now a tool we can use for all this work we've been doing and for the vision that we've seen for our students. And we jumped on that right away. We had 1 week to complete this. We worked on it pretty much all day for that whole week. Got ourselves, it was about a 100-page paper then, because we're like only 10 schools were gonna be accepted, and we put all the time and energy in, and we submitted it, and we were accepted into the pilot. And then we knew, all right, we're there. How are we gonna start this? What is first? Most schools chose, within that pilot, the first year was supposed to be, all right, first year planning, and then after that implementing. We didn't want to wait. We didn't want to plan, because our superintendent always tells us planning is great, but every year you plan, you just lost a group of students. And we decided, talked about it, we were like, all right, math is going to be all in on this. We're going to move with that. And then we also had a couple others, like English, one also wanted to jump in and start this and start to get, see how it works. And then there's some components that we implemented across the whole school. If you go ahead and go to the next slide. As you can see, that since we've started that, there's some other things that we've now implemented and realized if you don't have these components, you're not going to have the success. And Lisa, you want to talk about advisory?
So I wanted to speak to somebody brought up earlier in the questions about how, what were those instructional practices? And I wanted to speak to it here. So the instructional practices for competency ed are things like project-based learning. They're things like teacher-facilitated learning. They're things like blended learning, personalized learning. You've heard all these buzzwords, but there's one piece that the kids struggled with that first year, and that was that disposition piece. Nothing to do with knowledge acquisition, but that professionalism. Were they maintaining attendance? Were they ready to learn? Were they there with their materials? Were they able to stay on task? But the most important, what we learned, was managing deadlines. This was our biggest pushback, because when you use words, and use them carefully, I warn you, Minnesota, when you use words like anytime, anywhere learning, self-paced learning, self-directed learning, all of those things have deadlines attached because the real world, the authentic world, has deadlines. We had a deadline to be ready for this presentation today, as an example. So we actually incorporated professionalism, a competency of professionalism that includes managing deadlines into our curriculum. So 20% of our students' grade comes from professionalism, and that is one grade that is fed from all the courses. So if you are, let's say you're a kid that just loves math, and you manage all your deadlines. In fact, you are ahead of the curve. You work forward because you're a kid that it's too slow in algebra. You're moving on. You're going to earn your credit in geometry, which all students do. But in English, they hate to read. They don't like to write very much. They tend not to meet their deadline there. This grade helps keep them in line. It helps feed us that this is truly how they're demonstrating mastery and professionalism. And that's the key, is demonstrating mastery of learning, demonstrating mastery of skills, demonstrating mastery of all those competencies that we showed you in the beginning. And how do they do that? They do that by performance assessment. When they are demonstrate their learning, they are demonstrating with performance assessments. Objective tests are a thing of the past. The only time you might see objective questions are informative work, and if a student is doing a cold read, they might answer with objective questions, but it's always for just a cold read, nothing that they've seen before. The other piece that I wanted to touch on that is a huge part of our competency is the freshman, what started with freshman advisory. It's actually an all-school advisory model now. That advisory piece is kind of the glue that holds it all together. So that advisory piece is that every student has a one-to-one advisor. We have staff members, including our principal and the head of our maintenance department, that are freshman advisors. They go through a long process to get vetted, actually, and we best match kids to their advisor because they will have that advisor for all 4 years. That advisor helps them determine a career pathway. They will help them with their social emotional well-being. They get one-to-one meetings with them almost daily. And there's only one advisor for around 12 students. They also help monitor their student success plan. Every student receives an individualized learning plan, not to be mistaken with an IEP. This is a student success plan that drives their high school experience, if you will. Eric, do you want to go in a little bit and talk about the interdisciplinary work? Did we lose you, Eric?
Sorry.
All right,
no. As you look at, as you look at the overall picture of what we've done, if you go and move on to the next slide, the question we want to ask you is, like, you saw our journey, and we know that each school probably has their own journey of what they've done that can lead into going into competency. So you've probably done things in the past that will make the transition much easier for you. And that's what our purpose of sort of showing you our timeline was, is what have you done that will help you move. As you go to the next slide, you'll see the one component about competency education is that it's not about focusing on one thing. It's not focusing on math. It's not focusing on the reading. But what it is trying to allow students to do projects or performance tasks where they're actually using all of them. It's no longer learning in silos. It's actually learning everything together. And it's a focus of, in every class, of focusing on not just the knowledge, content knowledge, but the skills and dispositions that they're going to need, and giving them feedback on those things. You know, at Ridgewood, we're looking at more interdisciplinary stuff, as many projects as we can. We have our freshman team. They come up with projects where there's going to be writing, problem solving, presentation skills. And those are the experiences we want to provide our students, because those are going to demonstrate what the real world is. If you go ahead now to the next slide, and Lisa, if you want to talk about lessons learned.
So our lessons learned, just to wrap it up, one, performance tasks. Everything is demonstrated. They're learning through performance tasks. Students should not take a performance assessment until they have demonstrated the learning necessary in which to do that performance assessment. Number two, the framework has to be in place. Our competencies have gone through an implementation cycle and feedback cycle 2 times around. We take feedback, we make changes, we are constantly calibrating student work, setting anchor tasks, and working on our iterated reliability. The big one, get comfortable with being uncomfortable. This is messy, messy work. You will take many, many hits going forward, but it's for the good of the kids and it's for equity. Finally, we learned in trying to create different kinds of teams, the best team to form when you are moving forward and piloting this work is the coalition of the willing. Trying to pull the laggards really is, it's too hard. And this kind of work is hard and it's messy, and coalition of the willing is who you need to ask for. Transparency is another lesson learned. You have to be transparent. You need to tell all of your stakeholders what you're doing and get their feedback. And finally, you have to remember that in knowledge versus behavior, that just because a student might know something and might be very good at something doesn't mean that they have the grit to follow through and finish. And that is what we're teaching, is the grit.
As many as, as we've had to shift to e-learning, and I know with Illinois, they have basically a policy, like your grade cannot go down over the, over this e-learning. And the one thing about competency is students control their grades more than anything. And that's been a shift that we had to switch with the grading policy, because once again, we don't even give students, performance tests. We make sure that they're ready before we give them assessment. Lisa, do you want to talk anything more about how with our competency system, things have not had to change much?
Yeah, I'm just going to wrap it up with that, just because this is where we are in remote learning. There's no educational harm when you do competencies, because what's happening is kids are being met where they are and being asked to demonstrate what they've learned. We have used this COVID pandemic to get kids to write about what's going on in their lives. They've shown evidence of their writing through how they stay healthy. They have showed evidence of how they can create the scientific method through doing graphs and things like that on their physical fitness and well-being. We take whatever we have, and we've been able to make the transition because of it. And then I know somebody's asked this, and we'll get to that in the Q&A, but yes, because our modules were already posted on our learning management system, again, our change process to remote learning was really without a blip. So this is truly anytime, anywhere. Sorry. All right, now we can go to questions. Sorry about that.
Lisa and Eric, thank you so much. I'll get to questions in a second. I just want to acknowledge that we are having some audio issues with feedback, and we're working to manage that better. I also want to remind everyone that we do have the closed captioning option available, which can sometimes help with the audio issues as well. Okay, so Lisa and Eric, we have a lot of questions. I also want to note that any questions we don't get to, we will work through the chat box to get those answered for attendees. So thank you all for sending in some really great questions. So first one, should we be concerned about how flexible pacing could affect a 4-year graduation timeline?
Absolutely not. I love that question. I love it. Because here's the truth. As teachers, I've been in this business for about 25 years. We always, we're always teaching to that middle. When we talk about that 4-year timeline, most students will be in that 4-year timeline. When you're talking about outliers, you're talking about the small percentage of lows and then the high, the small percentage of super highs. Those small percentage of super highs, what you're doing for them is you're giving them dual credit options, you're giving them internship options, they're still part of your 4-year plan, but now they're just getting more college credits while they're with you. That's for the high kids. Now, what about the lower kids? The lower kids, we have interventions in place. We use most of our title funds for tutoring. We have extended school year where kids are no longer retaking whole courses. They're just taking the portion that they did not master. So we have not run into anyone that has not finished within the 4 years.
Okay. Can you speak to how switching to Canvas, and you might just want to give a mention about what Canvas is, made a difference in your CD implementation? The commenter said, I've been trying to get my school on board for over a year.
So Canvas has been our learning management system since 2013. So our teachers had professional development for years using Canvas. So for us, it wasn't a matter of switching. What it was a matter of, now all teachers were on board and they were now more consistent with creating the modules. And yes, it doesn't have to be Canvas, having a learning management system is a crucial, essential element to competency-based education.
Great. Here's a comment that we wanted to recognize. Students don't know what they don't know about their own learning because we have been doing education to students instead of allowing students to understand why learning is necessary and grow to love their learning experience with purpose and agency. Students will have to learn how to learn differently and be engaged from the beginning. Any reflections on that?
That is probably the biggest thing. And when people ask about that, competency education is about students being able to control, because once they're going to leave us and they're going to go off to college and then they're going to go to career, we want them to know how they learn best. We want them to know how to manage deadlines. You know, that's just the real world. And the thing we've noticed is, you know, from those 3 questions I mentioned earlier when we switched this, is that's not what students are used to, being told what to do and then doing it. And we want them to take control, and we want them to tell us, yeah, how are you going to demonstrate mastery of learning, instead of us always saying, here's how you're going to do it.
Great. What role do the parents play with students and advisors?
So the parents are, again, we use full transparency. Our parents do have access to Canvas with a parent view. Our parents are invited on multiple occasions to come to the school, to email with us. We've had parents come in for one-to-one meetings. Students will email their parents evidence of their competencies as we go along. Again, we are a high school district, so you don't often have as much parent collaboration as we'd like, but the parents that are involved do get the transparency that they are looking for.
And the nice part about the advisory model is now if a student is struggling, they're not going to have 3 or 4 teachers that are calling home. Those teachers will talk to the advisor, and then that advisor will be the connection with the parents. Especially right now with the e-learning, it's been great having that advisor relationship to communicate.
Absolutely.
Someone asked a clarification question. Is 20% of every course grade comprised of professional skills?
The answer is yes. And that grew out of the feedback that it was needed.
And have you all reviewed the data on the professional competency and broken that down by multiple subgroups?
We have, and actually the group that we were struggling with most with meeting deadlines were our at-risk learners. And we actually, because of their feedback, student feedback, we have stuck with what we're doing. Our students actually have come around to believing that they actually need professionalism. So the data has been positive. Yes, our freshmen on track numbers are higher, our graduation rate is higher, our attendance rate is higher, our truancy rate is better. Yes, the data is showing what we need to show.
Yeah. And we have actually finally, we've been trying to, our achievement gap with our Hispanic students has finally closed as well.
Yes, that is what we are most proud of. It is truly showing equity.
Great. What was the process to create performance tasks?
Long. So, first of all, most of your districts are doing performance tests. I'm going to give you a couple of examples of performance tests that you've been doing for the long term. For example, writing an essay is a performance task. That's a huge one. Doing a science experiment and creating your own experiments and testing, doing your own data, that is a performance assessment. Doing cold reads is a performance assessment. Doing a presentation is a performance assessment. Again, like Eric mentioned, there are many performance assessments that you have been doing for the long term that are actually can continue on. You are not reinventing the wheel. Yes, we're transforming education, but you're not reinventing everything.
Can you talk more about learning required prior to taking assessment? How much time do you give students?
It depends on the unit. So if we have, if it's a, let me give you an example. Like we start the year, or in the middle of the year, we do a college and career planning unit for career exploration. That unit happens to be about 2 weeks. The performance assessment for that unit is a presentation to an authentic audience, somebody in their career pathway, for example. In order to do that, they have to complete X number of things, X number of assignments. They have to do interest inventories. They have to do a research project. They have to do mini interviews to prepare for interviewing a professional, that sort of thing. So it depends on the unit. It all depends.
Okay. How did you re-engage or re-motivate students who are years behind their peers? Is there a track to make up prior years lost?
You know, that's a great question. And to be honest, those are the students that we saw really early on that were finally starting to excel, because it's, you know, competency-based education is also about meeting students where they are and getting them to grow. And in the past, we always just put everybody in that pile and said, here's where you're at, and let's try to move you along. And we realized that's not working. And then they'd be embarrassed to ask questions in class because now people aren't going to think I'm smart, or I'm going to hold up the class. So when we were able to switch to that, we actually are able to meet kids a little bit more where they're at. And the whole point of that is, like, if you look at what the classroom model is, it's no longer, you know, the teacher up there talking to the students. It's the students engaged in activities. It's about grouping the students where they're at to provide them the supports they need. It's about doing mini lessons. That's another thing. People think, oh, you switch to competency, there's no more direct instruction. No, that's not it at all. But the direct instruction is different. The direct instruction will be for one group and more direct instruction for another group. So there are more mini lessons. And by making this switch, and once again, the teachers, we have some teachers that are doing an excellent job. What they do is, because all the curriculum is already on our, you know, is on Canvas, so they're not planning curriculum, but what they're doing is they do exit slips to figure out what are the students' needs, and then their planning is actually grouping those students and then providing those, you know, providing the students with each of their individual needs.
So they use
now,
data,
you know,
to inform their instruction daily. I think that's an important message.
Yeah. And so now a kid in the past may have sat in class completely lost, being non-productive, and now every day the students are productive in class and they are growing in class.
Lisa and Eric, thank you so much for sharing your experience today. As you can tell, we had a lot of questions from attendees.
I see in the chat box, I feel so badly that we can't get to them all.
So yes, we'll continue to field those questions to you both as we continue on and try to get everybody some answers. But thank you so much again for coming and talking